Hi everyone. A week has passed since the release of the new region of Overedge, which, as many know, is part of the Snowy region. And against this backdrop, some rather interesting rumors have begun to appear online that it is in this region that we will first be able to meet the last 7th Archon. And I'm talking, of course, about the Queen. So, sit down comfortably. I propose today that we together examine this character. Namely, we'll talk about her appearance, and we'll also discuss what she might become in gameplay. It will be extremely interesting. And let's start with what we already know. Namely, that the Moon and Natya versions, in particular, are a prologue to the release of the Snowy one. And that's why in these updates, instead of Archon, we have the goddess of the moon, Columbina. Well, yes, she is essentially also an Archon, but already at the edge. This can be determined because she is depicted on the statues of the 7, even though she is essentially the 8th Archon, but that's beside the point. Everything is already confused, so I suggest not further elaborating on this topic and simply accepting it as a fact. However, as in any prologues, we will gradually be introduced to future important characters, such as the 7th Harbinger of Fatui and Sandrone, the leader of the Harbingers of Piero. Of course, by this logic, we could be introduced to the Queen, whose release delay, in my opinion, directly suggests that her release will mark a certain historical horizon. And I draw this conclusion because the Queen is not only the most anticipated heroine in the entire game, but also the literal engine of the plot. As everything that has happened in the story since Fontaine's release touches specifically on Fatui and the Abyss. And those rare meetings of the twins are more likely meant to remind players that, as it were, the traveler has a relative, and nothing more. However, despite the fact that we have heard about the Queen and her grand plan many times already, we have no specifics on this matter. However, with the exit over the edge, I and many others are absolutely certain that this veil of secrecy will finally fall. And even if we don't see the Queen in person, we will at least hear her voice and learn the general outline of what she has planned. And if we take the incident with the decoction letter, which became the inciting factor to Natlan's plot, then I can assume that this could theoretically happen somewhere in the middle or towards the end of Liyue's version. The fact that she definitely will not be released as a playable character in the Luna versions is, I think, clear. Because, as I said earlier, these are filler versions, in which the developers will finally focus not on useless kilometers of the map that everyone will forget about in a couple of days, but on game mechanics that should have been developed back at the release of the game. So, we'll most likely see the Queen herself as a playable hero in the true 6th versions of the game, which will be released in about a year. Unless, of course, the developers decide to release a loot version of some Saturn or Jupiter after the update. So, okay, we've sorted out when it will appear. Now, let's move on to the equally interesting part of the video, namely, what the Queen could become as a playable character in terms of skills and abilities. And here I could once again unpack my old theory, which has already been repeatedly confirmed about that slimes of different elements possess roughly the same abilities as Archons. Then look at the Cryo slimes and say that, in theory, she would be a Cryo shielder, with some kind of buff for the squad. However, going over the edge gave me a rather interesting thought. What if the Queen is collecting Gnosis in order to, using advanced technologies developed on Androna, combine them together and thereby learn to use all the elements simultaneously, like the main hero does? After all, we've already seen the unrivaled power of our main character, who can freely change elements to any desired one in battle. And what if, thanks to this development, the Queen can also change elements, like, for example, Farina does with her stances? And if I'm right in my guess, the Queen will become a truly unique character, one that they definitely won't want to miss. But if to face the truth, it sounds interesting, fun, and cool, but in reality, it's just the workers aren't renowned for such unique mechanics. She could be collecting Agnoses for some kind of cool robot that could defeat Celestia. So everything could be as simple as that, especially since we already have a working theory with slimes, which hasn't let anyone down yet. So that's how it island. Be sure to let me know in the comments if my version of the Game Queen interested you, or if you have a different opinion on the matter. It will be interesting to read, and we'll hear from you again.